As much as the martial arts are about respect and honor, cage fighting for cash really isn't. The UFC, the worldwide leader in Mortal Kombat, isn't in the business of being the nicest, they're trying to be the most profitable. So in the spirit of that unfettered ambition, we'll be looking at 10 times the UFC put Bushido aside and did some of their athletes absolutely dirty. Whether it was to serve their own best interest or pure pettiness, today's list is all about the UFC crossing the yellow line, opening the folding door, and throwing fighters directly under the bus. I'm Tommy from MMA On Point, and these are the 10 most disrespectful things the UFC has ever done to a fighter. Number 10. Tito Ortiz gets erased from history. At UFC 172, Jon Jones defeated Glover Teixeira to defend his light heavyweight title. These are the facts of the case, and they are undisputed. What is in dispute is a graphic the UFC displayed on the post-show broadcast after the victory. The image in question featured Jones at the top of a list titled Most Wins in Light Heavyweight Division, and while this was in fact his 14th victory in the promotion at 205 pounds, a former star who would in less than 3 weeks be making his big Bellator debut, Tito Ortiz, took issue with the fact that he was nowhere to be found on this historical view of the division. He tweeted immediately that the UFC was trying to erase him from history, some arguing that technically Ortiz had 15 wins and Liddell even more, so both should be featured and higher than Jones. Let's say the UFC though doesn't count the light heavyweight division when it was technically called the middleweight division. If you go by that mark, Ortiz only has 9 wins in the weight class, but if you consider the fact that he was the champion before Zuffa took over and continued to be the champion in that very same division after their tenure began and it was changed to light heavyweight, it just feels pretty damn petty and disrespectful to one of the division's greatest champions. At the very least, they could have given him the 10 wins tied with Griffin and Hamill since the Zuffa era began, but of course I'm sure they weren't in any rush to feature the name of Bellator's newest headliner. Number 9. The UFC takes GSP's belt. This one is hilariously petty. When George St. Pierre got by Johnny Hendricks with a split decision at UFC 167, and then shockingly post-fight told Joe Rogan he was going on a little bit of an MMA sabbatical, things were a bit contentious backstage. Dana White wasn't really into the idea of GSP taking some personal days. There was a report that GSP had been transported to the hospital and would not be at the press conference. Then there was the claim that the UFC staff was attempting to block St. Pierre from entering the presser, which turned out not to be true, just a bit of confusion, but what did actually happen is the UFC took GSP's title. Now, I don't mean that he was stripped, he would vacate that next month. I mean the physical belt that was there that night. See, at each title fight, the champion receives a new belt, or at least they did back in those days. And so the 167 title, which St. Pierre took with him backstage after the fight, he later told Canadian media was snatched from his locker room while he was in the shower.
Who did this? Huh? Where are you?
Now, the belt did appear at the press conference. It was brought out after GSP showed up, but if you watch the end, St. Pierre leaves and the belt remains. I wonder who they reused that belt for later. Number 8. The UFC steals Nate Diaz's thunder. The long-standing issues with the UFC and Nate Diaz are well documented. A shameless plug for our history of Nate Diaz versus the UFC video there, but one of the most disrespectful, and if I'm being honest, hilarious moments in this long-running saga took place at the UFC's 25th anniversary press conference in Los Angeles. It was a star-studded tentpole presser, and the big news, the big fight, literally signed backstage right before they walked out, was the return of Nate Diaz to fight Dustin Poirier in November. Diaz was gone for 2 years at this point, following his record-setting bouts with Conor McGregor, so this was a massive deal, and the UFC even brought Nate and Dustin out last to show that they were the top dogs at this press conference. But then right before the presser ended, Dana White was like, "Oh yeah, we got one more thing to show you." Boom! Promo package for Conor versus Khabib, McGregor's return after a 2-year layoff. Nate didn't even make it through the entire promo package before exiting the event. Imagine the UFC holding this big presser where you're the star, only for your star to be stolen by Conor McGregor seconds later. Outside the event, Nate told TMZ he wasn't even sure the fight would happen now, and the fight didn't happen. For some reason or another, the official story is a Poirier injury. Number 7. UFC double books KHAMZAT CHIMAEV. If there is a new hotness in mixed martial arts right now, it is absolutely the monster hype train that is KHAMZAT CHIMAEV. The 9-0 fighter out of Sweden holds the modern UFC record for the quickest 3-fight win streak at 66 days and is absolutely setting the sport on fire. Seriously, everyone is talking about this dude.
The guy's special. I've been in this game my whole life. I've never seen anything like him.
Because KHAMZAT has been so active, the UFC has been more than willing to book him for new fights fast, especially considering the pandemic, where it can be slim pickings on a card. And as a result of the UFC's newfound love for this finishing machine, CHIMAEV was able to obtain that 66-day record, the third win of that streak being a one-punch KO victory over Gerald Meerschaert at UFC Fight Night 178. Where the disrespect comes in is the fact that 10 days before that fight even happened, it was announced that the UFC was putting together a fight between CHIMAEV and Damian Maia in October for Fight Island. You know, because nothing could possibly happen to him in a fight with Gerald Meerschaert, right? To imagine that KHAMZAT could fight again in less than a month's time, when medical suspensions for 2 to 3 months are given out all the time to fighters who didn't even lose a bout, it was a pretty bold move on the UFC's part, and a big old fuck you to Gerald Meerschaert, who sadly had this whole thing rubbed right in his face with that one-punch KO. The UFC has come to their senses though, negotiations fell through, and CHIMAEV is no longer facing Maia. Instead, he's likely headlining an Apex card against a ranked opponent in November. See senses. Number 6. Joe Rogan interrogates Renan Barao. When 12-year-old boy TJ Dillashaw shockingly defeated Renan Barao at UFC 173, it was considered one of the biggest upsets in UFC history, and so of course there was going to be a rematch. The two got paired up again that summer at UFC 177, but Barao passed out while cutting weight, hit his head, and knocked himself out, so the fight was cancelled. No big deal. Just kidding, it's a huge deal. This card was not pay-per-view caliber for 2014. In fact, there were so many issues the entire event only had 8 fights total. Joe Soto would be thrown into the main event in his UFC debut. They pulled him from the prelims just so they could still ask people to pay money for this card. Seeing as the FS1 lead up to the pay-per-view only had 3 fights on it, the UFC decided, hey, Renan Barao fucked up this event, let's have Joe Rogan grill him backstage during the broadcast to fill 5 minutes. Nothing like losing the opportunity to reclaim your title after the most embarrassing loss of your career, only to embarrassingly pass out cutting weight and then have Joe Rogan embarrass you on national television. The interview was a bit contentious to say the least.
Renan Barao failed to make weight. I don't understand how you can think that you were fine. This is very disappointing and very embarrassing, not just for you, but for the UFC.
Geez, guys, he hit his head on a bathtub. This thing wasn't going to sell more than 300,000 buys anyway. Number 5. Randy Couture gets banned from UFC events. Dana White has a lot of enemies, but if you were to make a list of Thanos-level foes for the UFC president, Randy Couture would certainly make that list. They just had all sorts of issues behind the scenes during the Natural's career. After resigning in 2007 over contract issues and a lack of Fedor fights, the two parties went to court and things got ugly publicly and privately. There was also the likeness fiasco, which would sour things when Couture ended up on the cover of EA's MMA game in 2010 alongside Fedor, ironically. But business was business, and Randy would see his career through to UFC 129 and then carry on as a contracted broadcaster under the promotion. That was until 2013 when Randy took a job with Spike TV and Bellator to be one of the coaches on their new show called Fight Master, which felt very much like The Ultimate Fighter. Dana didn't like that, not one bit. He was happy to be out of the Captain America business, but the perceived betrayal still stung, and so White lashed out where he could, informing Randy's son Ryan Couture, who would be making his UFC debut that April, that he could opt out of his contract if he wanted, but his dad wouldn't even be able to buy a ticket to his fights, let alone be his corner as he had been his entire career. Yup, banned for life for the ultra-successful Fight Master show that changed the MMA landscape forever. Ice cold. Number 4. Ex-fighter doesn't want to fight. This entry isn't about a particular disrespectful moment, but rather a series, a trend if you will, when it comes to Dana White and fighters who for one reason or another don't end up playing ball how the UFC would like. The latest example, at least as of this writing, is Dustin Poirier. Turns out he doesn't want to fight Tony Ferguson. White often has a clever way of approaching the topic, usually by praising the fighter's past first.
Listen, I like Dustin. I'm not going to sit up here and say anything negative about Dustin. He's a great kid.
And then being baffled at why it is they refuse to fight now.
He didn't want to fight.
Of course, Dustin had already made public that the issue was money related, but in the MMA world, the worst thing you can be called is a coward, and the idea that someone would turn down a fight immediately brings up that imagery, and the UFC knows it. Again, this is nothing new. It's a tale as old as Zuffa LLC, GSP, John Jones, Nick Diaz, Nate Diaz, Jorge Masvidal, Yair Rodriguez, hell, even Conor. Honestly, nobody can escape this headline. If you rub the UFC the wrong way and you're making it difficult for them to put together a card, you didn't want to fight. Number 3. The Cyborg situation video. Mark Twain once said, "Never argue with a man who buys ink by the barrel." The modern equivalent would be a man who has 10 million subscribers on YouTube. It's no secret that the UFC and Chris Cyborg were never really great friends, and in August 2019, things came to a head. There was a doctored video, an outside the lines piece. Cyborg was saying she wanted her rematch with Nunes, White was saying she didn't. Then UFC posted a video on their YouTube channel that would put Paul Verhoeven to shame, addressing the quote, Cyborg situation. The like to dislike ratio on this one will give you some idea the level of disrespect here. The 17-minute Dana White interview attempts to reframe White's infamous comments about Cyborg at the World MMA Awards.
Jacked up on steroids, beyond belief, and look like Vanderlei Silva in a dress and heels.
Highlights her steroid failure from 2012, uses Jermaine Durandamy's refusal to fight her, something GDR was stripped for and buried because of, as an example of how Cyborg's cheating negatively affected the UFC, and then of course, in the end, the message was that Cyborg didn't want to fight Amanda Nunes again. The icing on the cake, though, as this video ultimately concludes with White releasing Chris from her contract, is a sly little statement that the UFC will not be matching any offers, taking away any chance that Cyborg could use that at the negotiating table. It's safe to say that the UFC will be out of the Cyborg business for the rest of time. Number 2. Jose Aldo's rib injury. The UFC spent a lot of time and a lot of money building up the main event of UFC 189 between Conor McGregor and featherweight champion Jose Aldo. The two did a world tour together, they made a really snazzy trailer. This was to be the show. This was the peak of McGregor mania, the culmination of his meteoric rise. And so when reports came out less than 3 weeks before the pay-per-view that Aldo had pulled out of the card with a rib fracture, the UFC was not too happy. Dana took to SportsCenter with the Notorious himself to announce that Chad Mendes would be taking Aldo's place in light of the rib bruise. What's that? A rib bruise? I thought it was a fracture. It's funny, in the Notorious documentary, White and Lorenzo Fertitta seem to have a lot of details about the rib being broken.
He broke his fucking rib.
But nonetheless, on SportsCenter, it was a little boo-boo.
Aldo's rib is too painful, and he will not be fighting.
White did his masterful passive-aggressive laying into Jose, mentioning he's pulled out of 5 title fights, but Conor was a bit more blunt.
Through the world tour and through all the build-up, he was looking for his way out. Thankfully for him, his coach, his team, they have found their way out.
Not to allow his name to be smeared without responding, Aldo released his x-rays to show that he in fact did have a fracture, and not just some rib pain or struggles with the weight cut. Oh yeah, that got brought up too for some reason. That wasn't the end of it though. Dana claimed that the x-ray was actually from a previous injury. I guess facts mean nothing when everyone has their own. One thing that is for sure is that the UFC was just not having any bit of Jose Aldo getting to save face for pulling out of this massive event. Number 1. Jon Jones gets blamed for UFC 151's cancellation. Let's start this one with a quote from an official UFC press release. UFC 151 will be remembered as the event Jon Jones and Greg Jackson murdered. That is a real quote that was really part of a press release. UFC 151 is one of the most infamous stories in MMA history, and there are a ton of moving parts. I encourage you to check out the deep dive I did on it last October, but the too long didn't read of it is that the title fight between Jon Jones and Dan Henderson had to be scrapped a week before the event after Hendo tore his MCL, and ultimately the event itself would be scrapped as well, the first time in UFC history. Tommy, you just said Henderson got hurt. Why is Jon Jones a pay-per-view murderer? Well, in an attempt to save their show, the UFC reached out to a number of fighters, but ultimately landed on the American gangster Chael P. Sonnen. The UFC brass were so confident that Jones would take a short-notice fight with a middleweight who wasn't at all prepared for the bout, that when it came back that he and his team rejected the fight, they furiously pulled the plug on the event and made sure everyone knew it was Jon Jones' fault, even though for a dozen different reasons, like the fact that the card itself was very weak, or that Henderson tore his MCL 3 weeks before the card, it really wasn't. The scapegoating of the light heavyweight GOAT left a sour taste in the champion's mouth and would be a source of animosity between the two parties for years to come.
I obviously think Max won the second one, and I'm the biggest Max Holloway fan in the world. So even
I thought he won it too.
Even I feel really gross about doing 3 fights in a row with the champ, you know?
Don't taunt, you little bitch. White video on video games, great video. Thank you, Lord Carly. I appreciate it.
You came in the right time, baby. Look at that knockout. Does that mean I'm a better striker with Ben Askren than Paulo Costa? Bro! Yes! It's the jab overhand. Dude! Thank you. Shout out to Anthony Romero. I learned that at ESFL because I don't have impulse blasters like Iron Man. Wish I did.
By the way, we just got the follow from It's Chickle, and then we also got one from I'm a Penis. Oh my God.
Like literally
Speechless.
I don't know how to control this right now.
Pocket! Oh, here we go, baby. Here we go.
Hey, what's up guys? Jason here, just to let you know about our Twitch channel and our streaming schedule. We do that Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Just check our schedule at twitch.tv/MMAonPoint for more details. And then also check out our Discord. See you guys on the next stream.
A big thank you to Ben Rosette, who provided that sweet tune you heard in the intro. Check out his music by clicking the link in the description and go give him a follow on his Instagram and Twitter page at Ben Rosette. Huge shout out to the legendary once and future King Tomas Welsh for editing this video together. Follow him on Instagram at Big Beat Visual. That's beat as in the band from Doug and not a forceful strike. Thanks for watching. Please give us a like and subscribe. We've got 3 new videos or more for you every single week. Let us know what you thought of the video in the comments below. Follow On Point MMA on Twitter and have yourself a wonderful day.